Milo is back with another rule, conditional introduction. Much of the reasoning in ordinary language is hypothetical, so we suppose something is true for the sake of argument. Now, this is where scope lines become important. So this is called a subderivation. This is a group of lines that proceed from an additional assumption. So what this rule says is if we start by assuming that P is true for the sake of argument, and then we're going out and we're working out what the implications of assuming that this sentence is true would be, and those implications include Q, then we can stop this subderivation and we can infer that it is true that if P, then Q. That's the conditional introduction. Here's an example. If you draw on the couch will be ruined. If the couch is ruined, I will be angry. So if you draw on the couch, I will be angry. It's not a couch that my kids actually drew on. I just found that on the internet. That's some other person's rotten kid. Here is our symbolization key. Here's the argument in standard form. Here's the derivation. So these are our premises. If you draw on the couch will be ruined. If the couch is ruined, I will be angry. Now, in the derivation for this, we start by assuming, again, for the sake of argument, that Milo draws on the couch. And we're setting this off in a, so we're introducing a new, notice the parallel in the formatting of what we're doing here. We're introducing this as a separate assumption here to indicate that this is an additional assumption beyond the ones that we've already made, but also this is something that we don't know to be true. This is just something that we're supposing for the sake of argument. So we suppose this. Then, by conditional elimination, we draw the conclusion that R would be true. And again, by conditional elimination, we draw the conclusion that A would be true. Then, given that we've got a chain here running from D down to A, so what we can infer then is if D, then A. And when we do this, what we do is we cite the entire subderivation here. So we cite lines 3 to 5 and then the conditional introduction. So let's look at some of the terminology here. Make sure that all the terminology is clear. So this is a subderivation. It's a series of lines that proceed only from an additional assumption. And what's key about this is that the lines that are in the subderivation cannot be used anywhere else in the derivation. This is why they're marked off the way that they are, to indicate that they follow from this additional assumption and you can't touch them. The assumptions that you begin the derivation with, the ones that are up here, these are called primary assumptions. This additional assumption is called an auxiliary assumption. And this is a scope line. And what the scope lines do is they mark what you can and can't use. You can't apply any rule across a scope line. So you can't apply any rule to a sentence that is in the scope of additional assumptions. Right. The conditional introduction rule, it doesn't allow you to cross the scope line and get at any of these lines here. You're citing the entire subderivation for that. Right. You cite the fact that if you start with this assumption, you can end up here, but you can't actually access any of those individual lines. Right. For an example of that, look at this, right? If I draw on the couch will be ruined. If the couch is ruined, dad will be angry. So dad is angry, right? The derivation here is you get down to this point and then you apply reiteration and use that to pull this A out of the subderivation. And that you can't do. This is an invalid argument because, I mean, I've never had a living room that looked that elegant. Although I have to say, I don't understand why they have so many lanterns. Maybe their electricity is really unreliable or something like that. But if that was in fact what my living room couch looked like, I would not be angry. Right. So you can't infer that A is in fact true in this case. The scope lines are there to make sure that you don't make this kind of mistake in a derivation. and they're vital. You can't omit them. This is not a derivation here, right? Because it has no scope lines, right? You don't have any scope lines marking off the scope of the primary assumptions. You don't have any scope lines marking off the scope of this auxiliary assumption here. Your derivations may not be formatted exactly the same way that they are in the textbook, but there will always be a way of indicating what your assumptions are. So you're always going to have scope lines indicated somehow. And that is really, really crucial. They can't be omitted.